Israel-Hamas war has caused a surge of pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian activism on college campuses, leading to several cases of censorship. Now, a group of Jewish professors at Columbia University have waded into the discussion about free speech on college campuses in advance of Columbia's president appearing before Congress to answer charges of anti-Semitism allegedly targeting students. Jamil Jaffer, head of Columbia's Knight First Amendment Institute, writes that Jewish faculty at Columbia denounce the weaponization of anti-Semitism and call for the defense of the university as a site of learning, critical thinking, and knowledge production. Really good letter worth reading in its entirety.
Here's more from the actual letter penned by Jewish professors to the university president. They went on to say that rather than being concerned with the safety and well-being of Jewish students on campuses, the committee is leveraging anti-Semitism in a wider effort to caricature and demonize universities as hotbeds of woke indoctrination. Its opportunistic use of anti-Semitism in a moment of crisis is expanding and strengthening longstanding efforts to undermine educational institutions. After launching attacks on public universities from Florida to South Dakota, this campaign has opened a new front against private institutions. All right, so this was a pretty audacious and brave move given some of the pressures that they are articulating, that they've been experiencing, and that pro-Palestine groups, whether they be Jewish groups or Muslim groups or Arab groups or what have you, have said they've been experiencing on college campuses. This has really escalated in the last couple of days, given there's the story about a professor at Hobart and William Smith colleges named Jody Dean. She was a professor in the political science department who wrote an op-ed for Verso Books that has gotten her suspended from her duties.
Yes. She apparently said in the piece that she felt exhilarated and energized by
let's read what she said. She said that this was a big point of contention, but what she said in the opening of her piece was that images from October 7th of paragliders evading Israeli air defenses were for many of us exhilarating. Here were moments of freedom that defeated Zionist expectations of submission to occupation and siege. In them we witnessed seemingly impossible acts of bravery and defiance in the face of the certain knowledge of the devastation that would follow, et cetera, et cetera. Just so we know on the record what
is that not her saying she felt exhilarated and energized by the paragliders?
Yeah.
You don't think that's a fair characterization?
I don't remember exactly word for word what you just said, Robby, but I just want to make sure we have it on. Do you object to reading it verbatim?
No, I was reading from the office of the president of Hobart and William Smith's letter for how he characterized it.
We should read more from that letter as well.
That's what I was just about to read.
Okay, go ahead.
This was not my phrasing, this was his phrasing. He said she spoke about feeling exhilarated and energized by the paragliders on October 7th. People can decide for themselves. It sounds like that is exactly what she said. I find that utterly despicable and contemptible. However, it is clearly protected speech. It is an opinion she is allowed to have. We want our universities to be places where people can robustly disagree and say things that are provocative and controversial. They have placed her, they're suspending her. She's not teaching right now while they're doing an investigation. I utterly oppose that. I don't think they should do that. Frankly, I don't even think if some policy was violated, she should continue teaching until she shouldn't be suspended anyway. But I don't think she has violated a policy. She is allowed to have that opinion.
I think the difference is when you read, first of all, I've read half of the first paragraph of a lengthy essay, but when you read the essay, it's obvious that she's saying that this is an occupied people. This is not a kind of a subjective term. This is a term that's been wielded by every international humanitarian organization that you want to cite, Amnesty International on down the list. And that the images of an occupied people breaking down the walls and literally being able to fly over and overcome the barriers that have been not just symbols of, but literal implements of their occupation and their subjugation, their, quote, submission to occupation and siege, was exhilarating as a symbol of a potential end to that occupation. Whether or not you think it was strategic or morally permissible for the breaking down the oppression, resistance to the occupation to take the form that it did on October 7th, I think it's clear to say that she wasn't making the case that murdering civilians, for instance, was exhilarating. She was making the case that tearing down the wall, bulldozing through the wall that was enclosing an occupied people was exhilarating.
The paragliders did. They went and murdered people.
Yeah. So, and this is a conversation that we've had before. I know we really disagree, but international law is clear that an occupied people does have a right to resist, and they have the right to resist violently. So going back to the
They do not have the right to kill random people at a music festival.
That's right.
People in their
but they do have
homes.
the right to resist and the right to resist violently. So if you're talking about October 7th, as she is doing here, you can have a conversation about whether or not you think resistance and targeting military targets and killing military targets was permissible under international law and frankly exhilarating, as opposed to the murder of innocent civilians, which is tragic and unconscionable, right? You should be able to have that kind of conversation, and I think that's the kind of conversation she was trying to have here. Now, it's interesting to note the specific language that the college, Hobart and William Smith colleges, used in their letter explaining why she was suspended. She says, the colleges recognize and affirm the importance of free speech and ideas. We have worked tirelessly to create an environment where we can discuss hard issues upon which we may disagree. But we can never and will never condone or praise violence, particularly when that violence is directed at individuals based on their religion, race, or national origin. So one thing to point out there is that, of course, this standard that we do not condone violence does not obviously apply. We talk about people who are praising the United States retaliation against various acts of war directed against us, whether it's 9/11 or the like. We're having a conversation now about whether or not Israel is going to escalate and retaliate against the Iranian strikes, which of course were retaliation against Israel's violence against their embassy in Damascus in the first place. We live in the country that has perpetrated perhaps the most violence but from our government of any other country in the world to date, with the world's largest army and all of those kinds of things. So a statement that this is about the not condoning violence is quite frankly on its face false.
Right.
Moreover, the idea that this was targeted to people based on their religious, race, or national origin, when that's akin to saying anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism. She's making an argument against a Zionist project, a state that has created itself for religious purposes in the name of a religion. But the problem with Israelis and Zionism is not that the people are Jewish. This is not an attack on Jewish people in Philadelphia. This is not an attack on Jewish people in France. This is a condemnation of a political system that has, by necessity, forced the expulsion and subjugation of millions of Palestinian people over the last 75 years. And so how you can say you cannot condone violence here when presumably you can condone support of an Israeli state that has itself subjected Palestinian people to so much violence, and it is currently in the course of a siege on a population of 2.3 million civilians, or who are largely civilians, is a kind of asymmetry there.
Yes, I think it's obviously something being conflated here because, I mean, people support violence when it is self-defense. Most people think violence is, in some cases,
right,
called for, is an appropriate response.
Right.
When you are threatened with violence, you don't have to, if someone is aggressing against you, you're allowed to defend yourself. That countries and their police forces and their armies can defend the country with violence. So it's not really like for or against violence. What I found pernicious about that statement from the university president was he's conflating those things and making it sound like her political views, again, political views I find absolutely and utterly loathsome, are like a threat on the campus population, when it's not. Like the kind of violent speech that should not be permissible is to like actually threaten a specific student, right?
Right.
To say that they're threatened because she expressed a political opinion is exactly the kind of slippery slope and how we end up attacking free speech on college campuses that is not.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have had this conversation in the show where I brought up the Haitian Revolution as an example, a revolution that is heralded as the first revolution of enslaved people rising up and securing their own freedom from themselves, but a revolution that also happened with bloodshed, including the bloodshed of a lot of innocent civilian people and
Yes,
children.
widespread
and
massacre.
the idea that a college would fire a professor for saying the Haitian Revolution was a good thing, that the Haitian Revolution was exhilarating in its achievement of freedom for an enslaved population. I mean, it's difficult to imagine. Now, maybe we will get to that world. We're not allowed to say the Haitian Revolution is good because some innocents were killed, but you are allowed to say the Iraq War was good. You are allowed to say that using atomic bombs in World War II was good, which was a conversation that was had by a law professor of mine when I was in law school. So again, is this really about condemnations of violence? Is this really about whether or not you can say that any part of an event it cannot be good if there were bad aspects of it, if there was cruelty or killing of civilians or tragedy as a part of it, or is this an ideological war that is being framed in these kinds of safetyism terms?
More Rising right after this.